I was 7 weeks pregnant the night Holden introduced me to his business partners as the woman who keeps the lights on at home. 40 floors above the Chicago River, the Meridian's launch party hummed with exactly the kind of crowd Holden loved. Architects, developers, city aldermen, people who signed things with fountain pens and expected restaurant tapes to appear with a phone call. The open terrace gleamed. Caterers moved through the crowd like water. And I stood beside my husband in a sapphire sheath dress I'd bought specifically for this night, holding a glass of Pellegrino, trying to ignore the fact that the building we were celebrating was mine. Not mine in the way a wife says she helped with a decision. Mine in the way that every load-bearing wall, every recessed glass panel, every deliberate angle of the atrium where light hits at 4 in the afternoon in November came from a sketchbook I'd filled, over 14 months, on a drafting table in the back bedroom. Holden called my little art room. Mine in the way that the American Institute of Architects had called Aria Wells's design concept, a defining contribution to the Chicago skyline. Mine in the way that the copyright registration sat in Yasmin's safe, sealed, dated 3 years before Holden's legal team decided the design belonged to Holden Development Group. But Holden didn't know I knew that yet, so I held my Pellegrino and I smiled. Then Cassidy walked in. I recognized her from the company Christmas party 2 years ago. The one where Holden had been at her elbow all evening and told me I was misreading things. She was wearing a dove gray silk blazer, her dark hair down, and she moved through the room as if she'd been here before. Which, in a way, she had. She'd worked on the Meridian's interior build-out. Holden had hired her firm 6 months into construction. At the time, he'd said she was the best in the Midwest for commercial interiors. He'd said it with a warmth that had nothing to do with tile selection. I noticed. I did what I always did, filed the feeling somewhere quiet and went back to drawing. Holden saw her and his entire body changed. I was standing 18 inches from him and I felt it like a pressure drop. He turned and touched my elbow. Not to include me, but to position me, the way you'd move a lamp, so the light falls better somewhere else. Cassidy, he stepped forward, you made it. She smiled at him, the way you smile at someone whose opinion has always mattered. Then she looked at me with the polite, careful attention of someone who has been briefed. This is Delia, Holden said. My wife. She keeps things running on the home front. I kept things running. 7 years of attending every one of his events, managing every one of his contractor relationships, drafting every spatial concept his company had put in front of a client in the last 4 years. I kept things running. I smiled and shook Cassidy's hand. Her grip was firm. She said it was lovely to meet me. Holden launched into the kind of conversation that doesn't need a third person. I stood beside him for 4 minutes before I understood that I was furniture. I had my sketchbook in my bag. I always carried it. And I'd pulled it out earlier to note something about the East Terrace railing detail I wanted to document before the construction crew touched it. It was sticking out of my tote, and Cassidy glanced at it. Are you an artist? She asked. I started to say, yes, actually, I'm the She dabbles, Holden said, not turning his head. Delia's very creative. The word dabbles sat between us. Cassidy made a small, sympathetic sound. One of those sounds women make when they're being kind to someone they pity. I reached into my bag and quietly pushed the sketchbook all the way to the bottom. An hour later, I found Holden on the East Terrace with Cassidy and 2 developers from the London office he'd been courting for a new Manchester project. They were laughing. The city lights spread below, and the October air was cold the way Chicago cold gets. It doesn't ease in, it just arrives. I stepped out. I came to stand near my husband. He turned. Something moved behind his eyes, quick, like a door shutting. Delia. His voice was pleasant, surface-level pleasant. We're in the middle of something. I know. I just wanted to. His hand found my wrist. Not rough exactly, but his fingers closed around the bone with a pressure that meant stop. He steered me 2 steps back toward the terrace door, his back to the London group, his voice dropping. This is a working event, he said. Stop hovering. Stop hovering. I looked at him. I looked at the man I had made a home for, cooked for, stood beside, built for, and I said, very quietly, let go of my wrist, Holden. He released it. He adjusted his cuff. He turned back to the group and said, sorry about that, with a small explanatory laugh that invited everyone to understand without saying so. I walked back inside. I went to the restroom. I ran cold water over my wrist and looked at myself in the mirror. The bruise came up fast. A faint ring of pink, barely visible, but there. I pressed my palm flat against the cool marble of the sink. And that was when the cramping started. I told myself it was nothing. Implantation, normal discomfort, the kind of thing pregnancy books say to breathe through. I called a rideshare from the lobby. The driver asked me if I was all right. I said yes. Northwestern Memorial's ER at 11 on a Thursday in October is fluorescent lights and plastic chairs, and the specific smell of antiseptic that I will never forget as long as I live. The triage nurse asked me if I had someone coming. I said no. She wrote something on her clipboard and didn't push it. The OB on call was a woman named Dr. Ferraro, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a voice that was precise and not unkind. She did the ultrasound herself. She looked at the screen for a moment. Then she looked at me. "The pregnancy isn't viable," she said. "I'm sorry. You're already in the process of losing it." She asked if my husband was on his way. "He doesn't know," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Is there someone I can call?" "No," I said. "Tell me what we need to do." I signed all the paperwork myself. The nurse brought me 2 warm blankets and a cup of ice chips, and I sat in that curtain bay alone for 2.5 hours while my body finished what the night had started. I did not cry. Not because I was brave. I think I was simply past some threshold I hadn't known I had. I took a cab back to our Gold Coast condo at 2 in the morning. Holden wasn't home yet. I went to the bedroom, pulled the rolling carry-on from the top shelf of the closet, and packed for 20 minutes. My passport. My architect's license. My laptop, which was encrypted and had never synced to any of Holden's accounts. 3 changes of clothes. My sketchbooks. All 4 of them. I left behind the dresses he'd bought me for the charity circuit. The jewelry from his mother Dorothy that I'd worn to every gala. The cashmere robe he gave me on our 5th anniversary. Everything that had been given to me as part of being Mrs. Holden Mercer. I left the discharge paperwork from Northwestern Memorial on the kitchen island, weighed down by his coffee mug. I wanted him to find it. I wanted him to understand exactly what had happened in the hours he spent laughing on that terrace. I called Yasmin from the elevator. She picked up on the second ring. "Delia, it's 2 in the morning. I need you to open the Area Wells trust documents," I said. "Everything. Tonight." A pause. Then in a different voice entirely, "Are you safe?" "Yes," I said, "I'm leaving." We sat across from each other at her conference table in Streeterville until 4 in the morning with the original copyright registrations spread between us. The Meridian. The Caldwell Center. The Pryor Street mixed-use project in Atlanta that had won a regional AIA Design Award 8 months ago. Every project Area Wells had ever built, all quietly and systematically transferred to Holden Development Group's IP portfolio while I had been at home arranging his calendar and confirming his dinner reservations. "He used your license," Yasmin said. She was looking at a document, her voice flat. "Area Wells is the architect of record on 4 of these. Your name, your license number. He filed with the city and never told you." "I know," I said. "When did you find out?" 3 weeks ago. I found the transfer paperwork in his home office." She looked at me across the table. 3 weeks. "I needed to understand all of it first," I said. "I didn't want to move until I understood all of it." Yasmin is the kind of person who doesn't waste energy on outrage when there's work to do. She stacked the documents into 2 piles, turned on her computer, and said, "Okay. Here's what we're doing." Holden found the hospital discharge papers at 6 in the morning. I know because my phone started ringing at 6:02. I had already replaced my SIM card. I stayed in Yasmin's guest room for 3 days. On the 4th day, I sublet a studio in Evanston from a colleague at IIT who was on sabbatical. On the 5th day, I filed the formal copyright reclamation with the U.S. Copyright Office, citing fraudulent IP transfer and unauthorized use of a professional license. On the 6th day, Holden froze my credit cards. He did not know about the accounts registered under Area Wells at a private bank in the Loop. Accounts that had been accumulating design fees for 4 years, quietly, without ever touching a joint account. He did not know that the trust Yasmin managed, on my behalf, held enough to live on for 2 years without touching the principal. He thought he was cutting off my oxygen. He had actually just ensured I would never need to breathe from him again. Yasmin called me the following Tuesday. "He had Jenkins contact 3 firms about you. He's telling people you had a breakdown, that you left voluntarily and you're getting treatment." I was at the drafting table in my Evanston studio with the revised competition drawings for the AIA Chicago Architecture Biennial Commission. Good, I said. Good. Let him explain it that way. It's cleaner. She paused. The biennial committee confirmed. They want you to give the keynote. I put my coffee down. When? 6 weeks. I looked at the drawings. I thought about the meridian, gleaming 40 floors above the river, and the way the atrium light fell exactly where I had calculated it would. I thought about Holden on that terrace, laughing. Tell them yes, I said. He called my father Morris, on a Thursday in November according to Morris, who left me a voicemail I listened to once and deleted. Holden had told him I was going through something and asked if I'd been in touch. Morris, who had watched Holden slowly replace everything I was with a version of me that was easier to manage, told him he hadn't heard from me. Which was true, because I hadn't called yet. I called Morris that same evening and told him some of what had happened. He was quiet for a long time. When do you need me to do anything? He said. Not yet, I said, but when I do, it'll be fast. I had also gone to the police, early on, walked into the district station on LaSalle the morning after the party, and showed the officer on duty the bruise on my wrist. He was not unkind. He took a photograph. He explained that without witnesses willing to go on record, and with a bruise this size, it would be her word against a prominent developer's. He said he was sorry. I thanked him and walked out into the November wind and understood that the path I had already chosen was the right one. December in Chicago. The AIA Biennial at the Chicago Cultural Center, the landmark building on Randolph Street with its Tiffany glass and marble floors, and more genuine civic beauty per square foot than almost anything else in the city. The AIA had invited Aria Wells to give the keynote address on the future of urban residential architecture. They had not yet made the connection between Aria Wells and the ongoing IP dispute with Holden Development Group, because the dispute was filed but not yet served. Holden had been trying to secure a meeting with Aria Wells for 6 months to commission the signature piece for his Manchester project. His new London partners had made it a condition of their deal. He arrived at the biennial with Cassidy on his arm. I know because Yasmin was already inside when they checked in, and she texted me a single word, here. I was in the prep room off the main hall, looking at myself in a full-length mirror. Black structured blazer, dark trousers, my hair back. My architect's license badge, clipped to my lapel, the one with my name on it. My real name, my whole name. I pressed my right hand flat against my sternum for exactly 4 seconds. Then I went out. I heard the room shift before I saw Holden. The committee chair introduced me at the podium as Aria Wells, principal architect of the Meridian Tower and keynote designer of the Chicago AIA Design Excellence Award for 2024. The room applauded. I stepped to the microphone, and somewhere in the second row from the back, I heard a sharp, involuntary sound. I didn't look at him, not yet. I spoke for 20 minutes about the philosophy behind the Meridian, about how the building was designed from the inside out, prioritizing the experience of the person standing in the atrium at 4 in the afternoon in November, about the 14 months of sketchbooks, the structural calculations I ran by hand before modeling them digitally, the specific grade of glass I specified to achieve a particular quality of northern light. I spoke as Aria Wells, because Aria Wells was always just me, the architect I had been before I became a wife, and the architect I had gone back to, being the night I walked out of Northwestern Memorial into the cold. At the end of the address, the committee chair returned to the podium. The AIA was awarding the Chicago Design Excellence Award to Aria Wells. Following a review of copyright documentation submitted by Ms. Wells's legal counsel, the award previously proposed for Holden Development Group for the Meridian Tower was being formally rescinded pending investigation. The room was very quiet. I stepped back from the podium. I walked down the stairs from the stage. I did not look toward the second row until I had reached the floor. Then I did. Holden was standing. He was the only person standing. His face held the specific blankness of a man whose entire operational model has just been removed from under him. Cassidy was beside him, her hand on his arm, looking at me with something close to fear. He pushed through the row. He came toward me. The crowd parted the way. Crowds part for men in expensive suits who are moving with purpose. Delia. His voice was a low, compressed thing, all the pressure he couldn't release in public. What is this? It's my work, I said. It was always my work. You can't do this. He was very close now. His jaw was tight. We are going to step outside and… No. I said it without raising my voice, without moving back, without blinking. We're not going to step outside. I reached into my blazer pocket and took out an envelope. It was a copy. The originals were already at the Dirksen Federal Building downtown with Yasmin's courier. I held it out to him. He didn't take it. Those are the copyright documents, I said, with the filing dates. And the notice of civil lawsuit for fraudulent IP transfer and unauthorized use of an architectural license. You'll want your attorneys to look at those within 48 hours. The federal filing is already done. Something moved across his face, the first genuinely honest thing I had seen from him in years. It was terror. Delia. His voice cracked, just slightly. We can fix this, whatever you want. The Manchester Project. I'll put your name on everything. We can do a joint press release. You come back. We settle this privately. Your London partnership pulled out this morning, I said. I know because they'd already been in contact with my firm about the Manchester Commission directly. I let that sit for a moment. They'd heard about Aria Wells. Apparently she came very highly recommended. He stared at me. I held the envelope out one more time. He took it. His fingers were not steady. You should go, I said. The AIA board is going to want the room shortly. He stood there for another moment with the envelope in his hands, and I watched something drain out of him. Not just the confidence, but the whole architecture of who he'd built himself to be in relation to me. The man who managed me. The man who positioned me. The man who introduced me to his business partners, as the woman who kept the lights on at home. He turned and walked toward the exit. Cassidy followed. She didn't look back. I watched them go. Then the committee chair appeared at my elbow with a glass of champagne and said, "Congratulations, Ms. Wells." And I accepted the glass and turned back toward the room, and the evening continued. The civil case settled 8 months later under NDA. What I can tell you is that Holden Development Group's market position took the kind of hit that doesn't recover in a single quarter. Dorothy left me a voicemail in January. She wanted me to understand that the family felt I had gone too far. She wanted me to consider what I was doing to Holden's reputation. She wanted me to understand that mistakes happen in marriages. I didn't call her back. My father Morris flew to Chicago in February. We had dinner at a place on the North Shore I'd loved since college. He ordered the salmon. He looked at me across the table for a long time and then said, "You look like yourself again." I hadn't known I'd stopped looking like myself, but I understood exactly what he meant. I started a firm. Yasmin helped me structure it. We named it Wells & Associates, which is a small private joke only the two of us fully understand. I hired 2 young architects from IIT, whose portfolios made me want to call their professors and say thank you. We took the Manchester Commission. We took 2 others after that. In March, I heard through someone at the Biennial Committee that Cassidy had ended things with Holden in January. I didn't feel the satisfaction I'd expected to feel. I felt something closer to nothing. The same quality of quiet that had been sitting in my chest since that October night in the ER, when Dr. Ferraro looked at the ultrasound screen and I understood that some losses run deeper than their size suggests. Some nights I sat at my studio window and thought about the baby I hadn't known how to grieve yet. I thought about the 7 weeks I'd carried something I hadn't told anyone about, something I had been privately, carefully hoping for. I let myself think about it a little. Too long. Just enough to be honest with myself about what that night had taken from me, the part that no lawsuit could address and no award could fill. There are things you put down and things you carry. I'm still learning which is which. In April, the city held a small ceremony for the Meridian's entrance plaza, a public art installation I'd built into the original design and fought to preserve through construction. A granite path inlaid with a line from a Carl Sandburg poem. A bench positioned so the morning light hits it at exactly the angle I had drawn it 3 years ago, in the back bedroom of the Gold Coast condo, in the sketchbook Holden once held up at a party to show what his wife did with her free time. I stood at the edge of the plaza after the ceremony ended and most of the guests had moved inside. The air was cold but bright, the way Chicago gets in April, when it finally remembers it knows how to be spring. I heard footsteps stop somewhere behind me. I didn't turn around immediately. I knew who it was. Someone from the city had mentioned his name on the guest list. He was still nominally a partner on the building's management structure, a separate legal conversation that would run its own course. When I turned, he was standing about 50 feet back, near the street. He looked smaller than I remembered, not in height. In the way a person looks smaller when they are no longer positioned above you. He had his hands in his coat pockets. He was watching the light move across the granite path. He didn't wave. He didn't call my name. I think he understood, finally, something fundamental about what those gestures would accomplish now. I turned back to the plaza. I thought about the way good design holds time, how you can stand in a space years after you drew it and still feel the original intention alive in the materials, in the way air moves through a room, in the exact quality of light at a certain hour. I thought about all the buildings I hadn't built yet. Behind me, after a long while, I heard his footsteps eventually move away down the block. I stayed in the light a while longer,